So let's continue with that filter component. On coaches list at the moment, I'm just saying filter here. And of course, we'll need a bit more than that. Now, all the markup and the logic related to the filtering, or to the filtering form, I would say, should go into a separate component, again, to keep coaches list relatively small. And therefore, in source components coaches, I'll add a second component next to coach item, and that's the coach filter.view file. In there, I want to set up all the markup and base logic that we need to let the user choose between different filtering options. Now, I will use the base card component in here as well, so that we have that base container style here. And then in there, maybe say in a h2 tag, find your coach. And then below that, render a couple of checkboxes. Now here, I want to present free filtering options because in our store, we have free areas of expertise. In this entire app, I support these free areas of expertise: frontend, backend, career. So these are the free filtering options that should be presented here. Therefore, I will actually use, let's say, a span as a wrapper. Add a class of filter option to it. This will become important for styling later. And in that span, have an input of type checkbox with an ID of frontend, let's say, and which is checked initially. Because here I'll make sure that all filter options or all inputs are checked initially, and then the user can uncheck them and check them as needed. So that's the input here. I also will add a label, of course, to make it clear what this input refers to. And here add the for attribute to make sure that we point at this input with this label, so that clicking the label also checks this input. And then add a text of frontend. And we can now repeat this twice, because we also need our backend checkbox here. So let's add this. And we need the career checkbox. So that's also something we should add. Okay, so that's nice. Now we got these three checkboxes. Now we need some logic to react to the user clicking on one of these checkboxes. So therefore, I will add my script block down there and add a data property. Because in this coach filter component, there is some internal data that we need to manage. I want to manage which filters the user chose or which options the user chose. So here in this returned data object, I'll add a filters key, which holds another object, where I want to have a front-end filter, which initially is true, a back-end filter, which initially is true, and a career filter, which is true. And that basically means as long as something is true, coaches that have that area of expertise should be shown. And then I'll add a method to change that data, the, let's say, setFilter method. This method should be bound to these inputs, that when they are clicked or changed, to be precise, setFilter runs. For that, we can listen to the change event here on input, which is triggered whenever the value changes from checked to unchecked or the other way around. And that's when setFilter should be triggered. And therefore that, of course, gets added on all these inputs. Now setFilter therefore receives the default event object, since we bind it to a default DOM event. And we can now extract two important pieces of information from that event. The first one is the ID of the input that was checked or that was changed. We get this by accessing event target ID. So that gives us access to these IDs which we added to these inputs. And then the second piece of information is active. Is that currently checked? For that, we can access event target checked to find out whether that input for which this event was triggered is now checked or not. And then I can derive my updated filters object here, where I copy the existing filters, so this existing filters data option here. With the spread operator, I copy it into this new object. So I copy all these properties into this new object. But then we override one of these three properties. We do this by dynamically setting the property name which we want to override and set it to our input ID, so to this constant. This holds frontend, backend, or career. And these are the input IDs we have here. So with that, we access one of these keys and set a new value for this dynamically set property. And the value is active, which is true or false. And then we can set this filters, so our data option, to the updated filters. With that, we should be able to manage the filters internally here, but of course that's not all. I also want to let the component that uses the coach filter component know about my filters. That's why I want to emit, $emit, a custom event here to communicate back to the parent component. And that's the change filter event, let's say, where I pass my updated filters. So where I provide the information about the updated filters to the component that's listening. And now it's of course a good practice to also add the emits option here and therefore make it clear that this component emits a change filter event. Now we can add some styling, so let's add some scoped styling. And as always, attached you find the coach filter CSS file with all those styles here, which you can copy between your style tags. With that, we can now use coach filter in the coaches list component. So let's go to coaches list, and there, first of all, import coach filter from going up, components, coaches, coach filter.view, and add it here to the components option. And then add it here instead of filter. Here, I want to add coach dash filter like that. No, not like this, but like that. Of course, here I now want to listen to that change filter event, which is emitted eventually, and call a set filters method, which we now have to add here. So going down in this component, I'll add a methods key, and in there add a set filters method where I get my updated filters as an argument, because that is the kind of data we're emitting in the coach filter component, right? We pass the updated filters as an argument here when we emit the event, and therefore in the place where we listen to the event, we receive this as a parameter. And here I now want to manage a new piece of data, or any data at all. So let's add the data option in coaches list. And here in that object, I want to have an active filters data property, which also has frontend true, backend true, and career true. But this should now be overwritten whenever new filters are emitted. So here in set filters, I'll set this active filters equal to the updated filters. And now with all of that, we can go back to the filtered coaches computed property and now not always return all coaches, but coaches that match our filters. So here I get my coaches, which I store in a constant, but I will return coaches.filter, calling the built-in filter method, which you can call on arrays in JavaScript, where we now execute a function on every item in coaches and receive the coach as an input automatically as a parameter. And now in here, I want to have a couple of if checks and check if this active filters frontend is true, which means I want to show coaches that have the frontend area of expertise. So therefore, I know that I want to show coaches with the frontend area, but now I can check if this coach in his or her areas has this frontend key. We can do this with coach areas includes, which is another built-in method in JavaScript, and to that I pass frontend. And here I then return true if that is matched, because that means that we want to see coaches that have the frontend area of expertise, and this coach has it. So we return true to keep that coach in our returned coaches array. And now we can duplicate this twice to do the same here for backend. And of course, here for career. And ultimately, if none of these if checks match, we return false here inside of that filter method or inside of this filter function, which means this coach, which doesn't have the fields we're filtering for, is excluded. And that should be it. With that saved, we now have this filter component here. And now, for example, Julie doesn't have backend. So if I uncheck career and frontend, only Max is left. If I uncheck backend, we got no coaches at all. If I check frontend, we see both coaches because both coaches have that. And that's the filter working. So now with the filters added, let's work on the contact and the register as coach forms. And let's maybe start with registering as a coach. This page is pretty void right now, and of course here I want to have a nice form where we can fill in all the details to sign up as a coach.